Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Leonie and today I'm just gonna give you a review of all of the books that I read in the past like 3 or 4 months. I've been in kind of a reading slump. I'll tell you more about that later. Despite that, I've been reading some absolutely incredible books. Also one that really disappointed me. But first, hello. Glad to be back. Haven't really been uploading in a few weeks. That is because I was on a big holiday trip to Japan. But before I talk about that, let me first show you some new books that I'm really excited about reading that I got through the sponsor of today's video, which is a book of the month. I am always excited to find this little blue box on my doorstep. I think book of the month is the best way to discover new books from up-and-coming authors that you may not have found out about in any other way. Because each month, the Book of the Month team creates a list of the best new fiction books in all kinds of genres. And then you get to pick which one of the list you want to read, and it'll be sent right home to your door. I'm just gonna show you the book that I picked for this month. That way you always have something new to read. For me, I now have this one, Dinner for Vampires. This is Bethany Joy Lentz's memoir, and I was mostly interested in this because apparently she was in a cult. I had actually never heard of this actress or this book before, but you guys know I love stories about cults, so I was super thrilled when I discovered this book on the Book of the Month list. And then the other one I'm also very excited about is The Teller of Small Fortunes, another kind of like cozy fantasy. You can also get your first Book of the Month book in the beautiful little box for only $9.99 if you use the code TURKEY. So click the link in my description to get your first Book of the Month book. So I have actually only just come back from a 3-week trip to Japan, which was so nice. I've been wanting to go there for a very long time. I bought a book there that I will talk about in this video. I got a lot of like Ghibli merch. I just have to show you this. Look, I got a little calcifer there. Look at that. That's adorable. But yeah, Japan was so beautiful, but I'm also happy to be back in my little home right now. I have been in a huge reading slump ever since I moved 3 months ago now. Yeah, I lived here for 3 months now, but the first month after moving, I didn't read anything, like nothing. I just didn't read. And I was in such a reading slump, and I was just like struggling a lot with just the change and the move, and I was just so tired. But I've been kind of getting into reading again. So let's talk about some books. The first book that I finished like way back in July, I think at the end of July, was Crudo by Olivia Liang. This is a novella by her. I mostly know her from The Garden Against Time, but I just kind of wanted to check out her writing style, so I read this novella. It took me about halfway into the book to realize that it is apparently like loosely based on a real person named Kathy Acker, who I personally never heard about. So if you also don't know who that is, it's not super necessary to enjoy the book, because it is, in the end, it is fiction. It is about this middle-aged woman, Kathy, and her growing disillusionment with her super privileged and like decadent life under the growing political unrest in the UK. This reads like a stream of consciousness portrait of a middle-aged woman in the modern world. And as she's kind of seeing the world change, climate change, the rise of fascism, she is kind of getting more and more disillusioned, having trouble with how all of her peers kind of shut her eyes to everything and continue to just want to eat their oysters. I gotta be honest, I didn't really feel like a strong story or plot in this novel. It kind of reads like a disjointed diary entry, and at times it also mostly reads like an essay, as in there's like a lot of thoughts. It's about feeling numb from all the negative news and how that is kind of stopping you from wanting to take action, and how that is like exactly what the politicians want. At its best moments, this book reads more like a political essay, and because of that, I'm more interested in trying out Olivia Liang's nonfiction work, because it's making me believe that she is a good nonfiction writer, but the story of Crudo honestly didn't really stick with me. Then I moved and I wanted to read a little bit of a romance to kind of just shut my brain off, and I read my first Jimenez book because everyone is raving about her, and I read Just for the Summer. I mostly loved the concept of this book. So it's about two people that are both cursed, kind of, like, not really, but it's like they keep saying like, oh, it's like we're cursed, because every time they date someone, when they break up, their ex finds the love of their life. So they themselves never find the love of their life, but everyone they date finds the love of their life after them. So these two meet and they're like, hey, we can hack the system if we date each other and then break up. After that, we can both find the love of our lives. So that makes for a really interesting take on the fake dating trope, because you have two people fake dating, not to fool anyone in their lives that they're really dating, but to break up. Like, the goal is to eventually break up and then find their own soulmates. So what you actually get here is a love story between two people who from the get-go are already kind of into each other. As in, they're both like pretty positive about this fake dating plan that they set up. So that means you get, on the one hand, lots of fun flirting and banter and kind of like romantic stuff from the beginning. But personally, it just didn't really work for me because I didn't feel any conflict. So overall, this book kind of bored me, and I didn't really feel very connected to these characters, especially because the characters just really, I don't know, I've said this before in another video, but they made me feel, you know, like just the cool kids in high school instead of the nerds. Like, if Ellie Hazelwood's romance books are always about the nerds that you can relate to, or at least I can relate to. I don't know, I'm outing myself as very uncool right now. This book feels like it is about like the cool people in high school. Sorry, just cannot relate to these kind of people. I just didn't really like them. It does spark some kind of interesting discussion about how far you should go taking care of a mentally ill person, because at first I really thought that this book kind of demonized mental illness, since kind of the villain of the book is a family member that clearly has some kind of mental issues going on. But it then does go into pretty interesting discussion of like, how far should you go to try to help someone that clearly doesn't even want to be helped, but does continually kind of ruin your life. And I did really like that aspect. But other than that, forgettable, and I gave it 2 stars. And then if you've been watching these wrap-ups for the past year, you know that I've been like slowly going through these little non-fiction books called graphic guides, where there's just like a general theme, a general topic, and then it's just like this really short kind of graphical introduction, which is great if you're someone like me who likes to know just a little bit about everything. And I read a little book about fascism. Very fun, very happy, very topical right now. I will say this book, I think it came out in 2000, so I was kind of hoping it would go into like modern iterations of fascism, but it stops at the year 2000, and it just kind of goes over the past like 100 years and all the different fascist regimes that kind of sprung up, mostly in Europe and Asia, and kind of the common patterns between them, which I do actually highly recommend anyone looking into that, looking into the patterns of how fascist governments come to be, so you can recognize them when they are happening right now. Just some of the common traits are things like aversion to intellectualism, like anti-intellectualism, looking down on women as housewives and seeing men as these kind of like really macho people that should be ruling the country, fetishizing a powerful state, and there's many, many more. I don't think you necessarily need to read this specific book. There are plenty of articles out there that just kind of go over the common patterns of fascism, and I do highly recommend looking into that. Okay, then just switching it up completely. Wow. I read a romance fantasy novella called Six Scorched Roses. This is by Carissa Broadbent. Carissa Broadbent is the same author from The Serpent and the Wings of Night, and this book also takes place in the same world, so that means that there are vampires, and we follow our, of course, non-vampire main character as she kind of strikes this deal with a vampire where every few months she comes by his creepy gothic castle to give him like a rose. I forgot why the roses were important, but for some reason these roses are so important that he gives her a vial of his blood, which he can then use to try to find the cure for a disease that is like rampaging the country. And of course, you know, every single time she comes by this vampire's castle, they seem to get it, they get along a little, you know, they get along. I really like romances of the type we are both kind of weird and not accepted by society and are finding like solace in each other's company. I love that. I love it when there's a romance between this weird vampire man and a kind of like weird out of the ordinary girl that doesn't really fit into her own society. Very nice. Other than that, I eventually was like slightly disappointed in it, as in it started out so amazing, but I felt like the tension between the characters, because this is mainly romance, like it's mostly romance, the tension between the characters gets resolved pretty quickly, and not in the super satisfying way. I would say it errs more on like the romance side, and it's not very spicy, even though at the beginning it seems to be set up to be more kind of like chemistry spice filled. So in that sense, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like absolutely amazing. 3 stars. But after that, I read what I think, pretty sure is like the best book that I read all year so far. I'm already so certain it's going to be my favorite book of the year, unless I read some kind of godly amazing books in the next 2 months, and that is All About Love by Bell Hooks. This is a non-fiction novel by Bell Hooks. If you don't know Bell Hooks, she is like a famous writer of feminist, intersectional feminist work, and this is a work about, well, the title says it all about love. You can see the tabbing also says it all. I remember reading this book during like a 24-hour readathon that I was doing with friends, and I was just constantly like, guys, I cannot stop highlighting parts. I'm just constantly highlighting things. I cannot stop highlighting every few pages because there's so much beauty in these words. So this is a book about love, and when I say love, I don't just mean about relationships in kind of the classic sense between lovers. Yes, it is about that as well, and about how we tend to have really weird expectations about love kind of created by the media and, you know, romance novels, I guess. And she kind of asks us to look at love in a kind of different way. One of the things that really stuck with me is that we have this kind of weird idea of like, if there's love between two people, like romantic love between two people, there has to be a relationship, and if it doesn't lead to a long-term marriage type relationship, then it's useless. and completely nullified. And she kind of argues that even if you meet someone that you just have like such a loving connection with and you can't have a relationship, or you just have a short relationship, it is still so meaningful. And I was like, that's such a beautiful way of looking at love, and that kind of shines through in the other things that she talks about love just in general, for your family, for your friends, but mostly also for your community. And I really agree with her take that so much in our current society is kind of actively bringing us away from love and more towards kind of selfishness, like individuality, consumerism, always focusing on like optimizing yourself and buying new stuff. It is actively leading us away from engaging with the world from a place of love. This, as I'm saying this, I'm aware that it sounds like really wishy-washy. And I feel like if you talk about love a lot, you run the risk of sounding kind of like, you know, like a children's novel that is like, oh, it's love. Love is the most important thing of all. And I actually think it is that, like, knee-jerk reaction that we have to talking about love, this knee-jerk reaction of finding it like cringe or a little bit over the top, that is stopping us from genuinely intellectually thinking about love as like an intellectual subject. She also mentions that we tend to not like take it seriously and really intellectually engage with love as a philosophical topic, especially when women like her write about it. So yeah, I just want to invite you to, honestly anyone, to pick up this book and rethink everything you know about love. And then after that, I immediately read another romance book. I read the newest Emily Henry book, Funny Story, and I can happily tell you that yes, I again really liked it. So the plot of this book is kind of a funny story. Imagine that the man that you are going to get married to just leaves you like the day before your wedding for his childhood best friend, and you are now alone, have no place to live, so the only place that you can live is like with the ex of this childhood best friend. So basically you just have two people living together who got ditched really like last minute by who they thought was the love of their lives, because the love of their lives ended up together. Are you still following that? And then what you get is this kind of librarian woman who is pretty structured, pretty shy about life, that starts living together with this absolute like chaos of a man. The general vibe between these two characters really reminded me of Nick and Jess from New Girl, and I think that is all you need to know to pick up this book, if you ask me. And of course, you know, the funny story really is that they end up falling for each other. And there's like a little bit of fake dating where they pretend to date to kind of make their exes jealous or kind of make them feel like they have their lives on the rails, you know? What I love about Emily Henry's romance novels is that you can always really tell why these two characters fall for each other. You can always really feel the chemistry because you just get to know both characters as they are. And even though they're very flawed and not like perfect characters, you can see why they fall for each other. And I really like the dynamic that these two characters have, because you guys know I'm always asking for the grumpy sunshine dynamic, but where the woman is the more grumpy one and then the man is the more sunshiny one. This has this. I also think this is the spiciest Emily Henry book that I've read. I felt like a lot of tension between these characters. Like, tension was here constantly, and I love that. I love it when the romance just has a lot of chemistry between the characters, and Emily Henry is amazing at building that up and creating these like such funny like banter conversation between the characters. Also, this is Emily Henry's first take on the fake dating thing, and I think she does it really well, because the pitfall of fake dating is that you get kind of awkward situations with very dubious consent. I think Ellie Hazelwood has a big tendency of doing this. You know what I'm talking about, right? Usually when there's fake dating scenarios, the characters have to like kiss, for example, or get really close to each other for their goal of making other people jealous. and they get kind of dubious consent. But Emily Henry does a really good job in this book, where every situation like that feels very much like both of the characters have like agreed on what they're going to do, and I appreciate that. And this was just such a fun book. 4 stars for Emily Henry, always. I think I like this one almost as much as Book Lovers, but not quite, but almost. Ooh, and then I read for the first time in a very, very long time a big epic fantasy novel. It's been a long, long time that I read like a big epic fantasy, not like a romantasy or anything. And that is the super, super hyped Will of the Many. I think I have only heard absolutely amazing things about this book. It has a huge rating, a really high rating on Goodreads, like 4.6 or something, which is basically similar hype to what Fourth Wing got. And almost everyone that I've seen reading this book said that this was like their new favorite novel. It is an epic fantasy where we have a world that is very hierarchical. You know what I mean. Where people use will, which is a kind of magic, and the people at the bottom of the hierarchy kind of cede their will to the people on the top of the hierarchy. So there's like 8 layers, you know, like a whole pyramid scheme where the person at the top receives will from like millions of people, and the people at the bottom don't have any will themselves, or like barely, I think they barely have any will, and then they mostly give it to the people above them. And the entire world is kind of created around this hierarchy, where the people that receive a lot of will have like the top roles. And the idea is like, if you go through an academy and you're like really good at it, you can get a higher rank and then also get better jobs. But then if you're not good at it, you will be at the bottom. So there's like this meritocracy, but very quickly this book is about the main character realizing that this meritocracy isn't really a meritocracy, but just like real life, it's mostly just about who you know and who your parents are. We follow our main character Vis as he is going to this academy to kind of rise through the ranks of the world, but at the same time he is on this like secret mission to figure out there's like a secret going on with the hierarchy. We know that something's a little fishy. There are old ruins with secrets and mysterious labyrinths. It's one of those fantasy books where the main kind of plot line is just figuring out this mystery, and I love that. The main problem that I have with this book is that it takes about 200 pages, which is a whole third of this big brick of a book, before anything interesting starts happening. Like the whole thing that I told you about this magical academy doesn't happen until like page 200, and you spend like 200 pages just like setting up, which I know is just like an epic fantasy thing, but for me it genuinely took way too long for me to get invested in it. But once I was invested in it, I was absolutely hooked. Like it's been a long time that I just wanted to keep reading, because I was just like, what is going on in these weird ruins with the weird spooky green lights? I need to know. It has a lot of political intrigue, which normally I'm not a big fan of, but I still felt very engaged with this type of political intrigue because it also kind of doubled as like cultural criticism of the modern age, and I do really like that in my fantasy books. So yeah, I do think this book lives up to its hype. I didn't absolutely adore it the way other people did, but yeah, solid 4 stars, 4.5 stars. I absolutely cannot wait until the next book, because it ends on such a like cliffhanger that makes you want to theorize. Like honestly, if you have theories about the end of this book, please let me know. I've also extensively talked about it in my Patreon discussion, so if you want to watch the Patreon discussion, you can become a member of my Patreon. You can still watch back the Patreon discussion that we did live. I just love books that make you theorize, you know? So still highly recommend this. It's just a bit slow to get into. Also, the only other thing that I didn't like about this book is that it really is one of those books where everything is so convenient for the main character. Like, he just kind of breezes through everything way too easily, and there, you know, there are canonical explanations for it, but still I was a little bit like, come on, man, like everything's just a little bit too easy for you. So again, that's why I'm not like, oh my god, best book ever, amazing, but still very good. Okay, and last two books that I read while on my trip in Japan. Let me just start with a book that I bought in Japan in a Japanese bookstore. I really wanted to get, like, as a souvenir, a Japanese book translated to English. You know, there are so many Japanese books that are very popular in like the English speaking sphere, and I was like, which one do I buy? Do I read some Murakami? Do I read like Breast and Eggs? Like, do I read Earthlings? But I was standing in this bookstore and there was just one little book that caught my eye because of the spine, because it looked like this. And you know, I am a sucker for any kind of foresty imagery, so I was like, let me take a look at that. It is called The Forest Brims Over by Maru Ayase, and then I read what the plot was about on the back of the book, and apparently this is a book about like this author who's always using women, his wife, as his muse, and then one day his wife eats a bowl of nuts, but they turn out to not be nuts, they turn out to be seeds, and she starts sprouting. Like, she starts sprouting little seedlings and plants and slowly just starts outgrowing the room and turning into a forest. And then her husband is like, oh gosh, what's going on? So he tries to like put her into a little aquarium terrarium, and then instead of doing something about it, he decides to write a book about her. And I read that and I was like, that is so bizarre. I love it. If there's one thing I love, it's a bizarre little book with a feminist message. You know, I also loved The Substance, the movie, so of course I had to pick this up. And I ended up really enjoying it. You kind of follow multiple stories, so it's not just about this one woman who turns into a forest, although she's kind of the axis of the story, but you follow the writer himself, you follow his editor, you follow another woman at the publishing house, and it's all kind of about how they look at women. It kind of poses a lot of questions about muses and looking at women as like this object of inspiration, and how at first this may seem kind of like a compliment and it may seem like an adoration of women, but it really is another form of objectification or kind of excavation almost, I would say, where men see these women as just like an object of inspiration, something that they can use for their own art instead of something that is respectable in itself. We can see the men in this novel seeing women only for their usefulness. So either just like as a housewife, only appreciating a woman for taking care of the children and taking care of the man, and not seeing them as a real human being that needs to be respected, but just as a housewife that exists to take care of others. And then there are other male characters that do seem to kind of see beyond that and see the women as they are, but then you very quickly find out that they still see women just as a muse, as just this kind of empty vessel that they can use to make their own art. The women are still objects that can be used for something. It's really interesting, and a lot of these ideas are kind of brought to life through this kind of bizarre surrealistic thing where the main woman turns into a forest. And I can't say I understand all of the like metaphor language, but I did enjoy kind of the bizarre imagery that was going on. So yeah, this was my first introduction to Japanese literature, and I did enjoy it. I would give it 3.5 stars. It also, this copy got rained on so much because it was in my backpack when we were in Osaka and we were experiencing kind of like the tail end of the typhoon that had swept over the Philippines and Taiwan, and it was raining. I've never seen it rain so hard, and the book got pretty much drenched. It still lives, but it just has that little crispiness to it. And then the final book that I read all during my trip to Japan was The Right to Sex. This is an feminist essay collection about a range of topics, but most of them relating to kind of sexual violence and sex in some way. I really enjoyed this one. I read it on my Kindle, and I'm glad that I did, because it was just one of those books where, again, almost every single thing you read, you're just like, I need to highlight this and also make notes. I don't think I've ever read an essay collection where I felt such a need to also make notes on the things that I was reading, because they were just making me think so much. It is one of those essay collections where I've genuinely changed my mind on a lot of things because of this book. So every single essay the author writes from a very intersectional feminist perspective, which is something I really care about, but also by reading this book realized I'm definitely not perfect as. I'll just like give one example. Like the first thing that like really kind of blew my mind when I read this book was in her first essay about false accusations of sexual violence. The real problem here is the violence itself, not the false accusations. So we have things like #BelieveAllWomen, stuff like that, where women tend to kind of encourage each other to always believe the woman, right? And not assume that there's a false accusation. And this is something I've also always really stood behind, but the author of this book criticizes that, and she mentions that false accusations, when they happen, tend to always happen against black men, and false accusations are something that often white women use against black men to be racist, basically. And throughout this entire book, she gives a lot of examples about if you use the law for something to protect women, you have to be really careful, because what tends to actually happen is not that women are truly protected against the truly dangerous men, but because the law is the law and the police is kind of racist, you end up hurting mostly innocent black men. So I think if you are someone who cares about intersectional feminism, especially if you're like a white woman, you should read this, because it gives you very clear, specific examples. I'm definitely not explaining this right. I'm probably not explaining this 100% right. She says it much better than I can. I will say this is an essay collection of the variety of very information and argument dense. It is not one of those essay collections that is written to be very readable with like a narrative to it. There's not a lot of storytelling in this essay collection. It's pretty cut and dry. Still really good, very interesting, but I think especially if you just want a little bit more of a like lighter essay collection, this is not the one. Or if you're like very new to feminist articles, this may also be maybe just like a little bit too dense. I find that the author never really gives a clear opinion of her own. She tends to really just kind of share different perspectives from different groups of feminists in different timelines, which I do think is kind of the power of this book, that she doesn't pretend that there is one single solution, or she doesn't try to sell you like one single easy ideology to take in, but she just makes very clear that it's all very complicated and there really is no one solution to any of the problems that we face as women. Great! And those were all the books that I recently read. I'm currently not really reading anything. Honestly, what am I gonna read next? I started listening to the audiobook for The Patriarchs by Angela Saini. This is a non-fiction novel about basically how patriarchy came to be. Like, how did men end up ruling? Like, where does that actually come from? Which was a question that I had, and I was like, cool that there's a book that's trying to answer that question. Love it when that happens. And also, actually, I am in the middle of reading The Bone Shard Daughter, because I was in kind of like a high fantasy kick after reading The Will of the Many. And I'm only like 50 pages in, and so far, it is really interesting. The story contains like weird monsters made out of bone shards, and I like it when there's just like weird little monster constructs in fantasy novels. So yeah, excited to, I should probably continue reading that one. Okay, let me know what your favorite book was that you read in the past few months. I would love to hear from you. My favorite was definitely All About Love by Bell Hooks. I want to thank all of my patrons for supporting the channel, and a special shout out to all of my elite Patreon members whose names you can see here. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Goodbye.